Hi Harshita, happy to have you with Scholarship Track. Can you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, hi Prakriti. So I'm Harshita. I'm a third year student from IIIT Delhi and I'm currently pursuing my bachelor's in computer science and applied maths. So I'm really passionate about full stack web development, open source, and these days I'm trying my hands on a lot of machine learning and NLP projects. So yeah, that's about it.
Oh my god. Okay, so that's a lot. So coming to more about Outreachy. So tell us more about what Outreachy is and like how did you get to know about this opportunity?
Right. So, Outreachy is basically an open source internship opportunity that is given to anybody or everybody that may feel that they are underrepresented in the field of tech. So, Outreachy is basically open source. For those of you that don't know what open source is, open source basically refers to projects or organizations that have their entire code base. For example, I'm giving you a very basic way of how open source works, but the entire code base for that particular project is there public on GitHub, and you are free to contribute to the code base, solve issues and anything like that. So Outreachy is like one of those open source initiatives where a lot of organizations, these open source organizations, come together and give you opportunities to work on projects. So, coming to how did I get to know about this opportunity? Well, for me, it would be through the past Outreachy alums itself. So, in my college, like my seniors, I knew that two of them had done Outreachy, like they're a year older than me. And in my college, one of those sessions was done where they told me about their experience, and that's how I got to know about it. And I was like really inspired by their words and the whole experience overall. So that's how I got to know about it. Yeah.
Oh my god, seniors are really helpful and it shows.
Seriously, seriously.
Yeah. So, like, what was the eligibility criteria, or were there any prerequisites to apply for Outreachy?
So yeah, there are a bunch of eligibility things, rules that you need to go through, and most of them, like actually all of them, are mentioned on the Outreachy website. So when you're applying for Outreachy, one of the most important things that you need to do is go through the eligibility criteria. So it is open to anybody that may be underrepresented in tech. Now, many of you might feel that being underrepresented basically would translate to being a woman, but that is not about it. So Outreachy is open to everyone. For example, even if you're a guy, like even if you're not a female, you are from the LGBTQ community, or you're a male, you're still open to apply to Outreachy. But you need to show the way that you might be underrepresented in tech. So, for example, you are from the LGBTQ community, then we all know that you do not have representation in tech. So that counts as underrepresented. Or, for example, you are Muslim, and for example, you are in India. Now we know that Muslims in India might have very less representation in tech, so that would count as being underrepresented. Apart from that, there are other criteria. For example, if you've already done GSOC, you can't do Outreachy, so you need to be really careful about this. And GSOC and Outreachy kind of run in parallel. So when you're applying for Outreachy, you also get the option to apply for GSOC, and it is up to you for like which program you apply to. And it is all up to you. And once you get, like for example, you get into both the programs, then you can choose only one. Or if you've been a past Outreachy intern or a past GSOC scholar, you can't do Outreachy again. So yeah, the eligibility criteria is very important. One of the most important is that during the Outreachy period, for example, when the internships run, so my internship ran from May to August. So at that time I had to be available for at least, like during my time the eligibility said that it was 40 hours a week of availability. Now that I checked the website for this cohort, it has been modified to going to 30 hours a week, but you need to be completely available during the time of your internship. So how do they check that? Basically, when you are going to submit your initial application, you're going to have to submit your calendar schedule, like of your, in case you're a university student, for example, like I'm a student, so I had to submit my calendar schedule, and therein they checked that yeah, I have actual consecutive days, free consecutive days, like during my summer break when I can actually work on the project. So it is very important to go through these on the website and make sure that you are completely eligible, like, and you satisfy each and every one of those criteria, because even if your application is great, you might be simply rejected because you do not meet the required criteria. Then coming to the prerequisites, well, prerequisites, Outreachy wouldn't necessarily specify something as being a prerequisite, but yes, it is always good to have a good, for example, open source experience. Like, that's the most important thing for Outreachy, I would say. So you should have some experience in open source, or you should like be at least passionate to learn about it. In case you're planning on applying to Outreachy, I would suggest that you try to contribute to an open source project first, because that would tell you about the way the open source thingy works, and you need to know about pull requests and issues and all of that. You do not need to necessarily have an experience in coding, because there are projects that deal with marketing or documentation which may not require coding. But it all depends on the kind of project you want to apply to. So if it is a coding project, then yes, coding is a must, and the languages that the project needs is a must. But other than that, no specific prerequisites except for like great open source experience.
Oh, okay. So you mentioned that one must know a little bit about open source or should learn at least before applying to Outreachy. So how did
Right.
you start with your open source?
So for me, open source started about an year ago when I applied to Outreachy, and it was completely random. See, there was this one project my friend and I in college were like really interested in doing, and that was open source. So we decided to start working on it, and that is how I started getting a hang of open source. So we had a project mentor, and it was basically a web development project. So back then, I was learning web development. Like a year before I applied to Outreachy, I was learning web development, which was like right after my first year of college ka summer break. So at that time, when I was learning web development, we found this very interesting project that was open source, and we decided to contribute to it. So we talked to the mentor, and we talked to like the people that were handling the project about, how to contribute, what to do, how to send pull requests. So that project was like my basis for open source, and that really taught me that you shouldn't be afraid of talking to people that are dealing with your project. Ask questions, engage in GitHub discussions, send out your pull requests on time. Like, I totally understood how the format is supposed to be, what how you're supposed to go about it. So yeah, that started it for me. For many other people, I would say, like, in case you guys might have heard of Hacktoberfest, so that is also a very good way of getting started with open source. And other than that, there are like tons of guides available online that will tell you how to get started with open source. So best thing is that go hands on and try doing it on a project, and you will know what to do.
Yeah, that is very right. We learn by doing the stuff.
Exactly.
So moving on to the next question. So what was the application and selection process of Outreachy was?
So, well, Outreach has quite a tedious application process, I would say, because the application process itself runs for a very long time. So, there are like parts to it. First, there is an initial application, then there is a contribution period, and then there is a final application. So, there are these three things that comprise of a total application, and it is sort of like a knockout thing. Like, you complete your initial application, you may or may not get selected, then you move on to the contribution period, and then the final application. So the initial application basically comprises of the application in which you're supposed to write essays and determines your eligibility for Outreachy. So the initial application mainly comprises of questions that would want to determine whether or not you're eligible for Outreachy. So they include the essay questions, which might be about how you may be underrepresented in tech, whether you not faced any discrimination while you were working in this field, and in your country, for example, or whatever region you are in, how are you underrepresented, or in case you are in your university, how represented is the sect that you are from. So these are the kind of essay questions that are often asked, and they're also available on the website. Other than that, as I mentioned, eligibility is the most important thing. So they would want to know, Outreachy really wants to, like, before they take you in, wants to determine that you are available for, like, now it is 30 hours a week. During my time it was 40 hours a week. So they want to determine if you're available for all the 40 hours of the week. And for that, you, if you're a university student, you may have to provide your university calendars, which like clearly highlight that yes, between the period of May to August, I have about 12 weeks of free time where I can work on the project. In case you're not a university student and you're a working professional, then also you have to like clearly show how you're available during that period of time. So at that time you may not have to provide a calendar, but you have to clearly state how and when you are available. So yeah, that is the initial application part, and which is the application that everybody fills. And then in case you satisfy the criteria, you move on to the next step. Then, from the initial application, we go on to the contribution period, which I will be discussing like more in detail. But the contribution period, in short, is like you need to contribute to the project or the organization that you want to apply to and work in the future. So, in your initial application, for example, one may think that yeah, you may want to have mention your projects that you've done in the past, or mention stuff out of your resume. But Outreachy really does not want you to do that during your initial application. They want to know your story during that time. Like, they want to understand you and not your coding skills or your background, like your coding background, anything like that. Or you don't have to attach your resume. But the contribution period is the time when your skills really shine, and you need to contribute to the project through issues and pull requests or GitHub discussions, whatever it may be. And once you made significant amount of contributions, you can apply for the, you can, like, then you're eligible. Like, you need to have at least one contribution to be able to submit the final application. And once you submit the final application, then it goes under review, and yeah, then you may or may not get selected.
Oh, okay. And then finally, you are selected if everything goes well, and the internship begins. Okay. So, like you mentioned about the essays. So, like, what do you think helped you stand out in the initial application phase?
So the initial application phase, see, one of the first things that I would like to highlight is Outreachy is like one of those programs where everything, literally everything you want to know is on their website. So I would suggest going through the website guidelines very, very carefully. So the website mentions like the average word limit of a individual whose initial application gets approved. Another thing is that in the questions that you are being asked, you are, the best thing is that you have to be authentic. You have to tell your own story. You need to make sure that it's not that you google the outreachy questions and get some idea about what to write. No, it has to be about you and how you are underrepresented or how you are discriminated against. So you are supposed to tell about experiences that you may have faced. So when I was writing this, I actually put in a lot of thought. I try to think about all those times where I felt that I was discriminated against. Like, it can be through anybody, it can be in any workspace, it can be during your high school, but it has to be in the field of something that you're working in. So you need to mention that, yeah, how did that come upon to you and how did that affect you, and how did that maybe affect the way you think or your personal, like anything personal. So well, discrimination or situations like these can arise in a lot of ways, and sometimes they might be very harsh instances also. Like, individuals may face very high levels of discrimination as well, and you might want to write that in your application. But again, you should always put like a trigger warning. So for example, like, I really hope this happens to nobody, but for example, somebody faced something like sexual assault or were harassed. So always put like a little warning, like it is mentioned on the website that how you're supposed to put the content warning. So in case you faced any such instance, put a content warning and then write about your experience. In my case, my experience wasn't this like harsh, but yeah, it was something that personally affected me. So I talked about it, and try to tell that how it affected my headspace or my personal space. Another thing is that it is always good, like one of the questions that is always asked is that how are you underrepresented in the tech scene of your country or in your region. So one of the ways to go about this would be to, apart from like this verbally telling, also include statistics in your application. That for example, I am a woman in tech, so how many women, like what percentage of women comprise of the workforce in tech right now. So it is always a good idea to include statistics because they give a more clear picture about the level of underrepresentation you face. And in the initial application, the main thing is eligibility. So I haven't seen many people get rejected in this phase, but yeah, in case you're not like able to show that yes, I'm available for like these many hours over these many weeks, or in case your essay answers are like really not telling a story but rather something that is just of the internet. So for example, I want to say that I'm a Hindu living in India, so if I just copy paste the figures from Wikipedia that yes, Hindus comprise 12% maybe in the population, so that wouldn't work. You have to tell that yeah, I'm a Hindu, I'm from this state, I do this, I do that, and what I faced, and what is my family background like, and how many people in my family are doing what I do. So it is these things, telling your story and making it like individualistic, that would help out in the initial application process. And apart from that, one of the things that you could also do is that, like, I have basically covered all the tips that I knew of, but there is a lot of interns, like outreach interns, that are like online, and everybody's blogging. So all the interns, we maintain blogs. So in case you go ahead and see the blogs of previous outreach interns, you would like really find out tips and tricks about how to make your application stand out. So it is always good to go through those as well.
Right, right. That was a very detailed description. Okay, so like once the initial application phase is over, then I believe then you need to contribute for a certain period of time. So how does one choose which organization he or she fits in, and like which organization she or he needs to devote time to?
Right. So, outreach is defined into like these periods. The first, you have the initial application, and after the initial application is approved, right on that day, the contribution period starts. So, the good idea is to figure out the organizations that you want to contribute to while your initial application period is underway. So, for example, you have submitted your initial application and you feel that yes, I have a good chance of getting selected. Even if you don't feel you have a good chance, you should always go ahead and like once your initial application is like submitted and you're still waiting to hear back whether or not it is approved, it is that time when you need to go to Outreachy's website, look at the organizations that are visiting that year, and start making a list. So my time, I made a list of about 10 organizations that I thought were like good enough for me. How did I choose them? Well, I looked at the tech stack they required. I looked at the kind of project it was, what was necessary, what were the kind of skills that they wanted of me. So, those were the kinds of things that I was looking at in the organization. So, I made a list of like 10 organizations that I felt like, yeah, these are the kind of projects I might want to work in. So, I was proficient in Java, Python, and web dev. So, I was looking at organizations whose projects were listed under those, tags. So, when your initial application, like once you've submitted your initial application and you're still waiting to hear back whether or not it's been approved, the full descriptions of the projects are like not shown to you. All you can see is basically the title of the project and the skills it may need, and even the mentor information is not fully disclosed. So you need to make your decision based on the skills that they require and the tech stack that they're working on, and accordingly make a decision. So one of the things is also that in Outreachy there are several organizations that always visit. Like for example, Firefox or like Mozilla has been one of the favorite organizations in Outreachy, and they have been coming almost every year. Similarly, like the organization I applied to, CNCF, that has also been like very prevalent and has been coming. Fedora, and then there is Apache. So there's like all these organizations which are kind of favorites and almost come every year. So you can expect these organizations to come, and it's a good idea to go ahead and explore the websites of these organizations, try to understand what is the kind of work they do, does it fit with what you know, and do you want to learn about this. So that's how you would like shortlist organizations.
Okay, yeah, this is little tearsome, but yeah. So like, how was the contribution period for you, like, and like, how did you manage things?
So I think like many people might think that it's the initial application or the essays that are the most important thing, and everybody keeps asking me questions on the essays. But trust me, essays are a very small part of what outreach is. It is everything. Like everything you do depends on the contribution period. You can have amazing essays, but once the initial application is approved, those essays don't really play a part. I mean, they would still be, like the outreach organizers would still go through your essays to like know about your story, but they wouldn't really play a part in your final selection. So it is the contribution period that makes it what it is. So once the initial application is approved, the essay story ends there. You need to like fully focus on the making contributions to your organizations. So like during my time, I had a list, like as I told you, I had a list of like 10 organizations, and I had them listed alphabetically. So when the contribution period started, day one, I started going through my list alphabetically. So the first organization was CNCF itself, the one that I applied to and got selected in. So I went to that organization, and once my application is approved, I had more, details about the project. So it is always advisable to join the Slack channels or the IRC channels or whatever communication channels that your organization has, and really get into discussion. So the first thing that you do is that once you have decided on an organization, you contact your mentors. So you do not drop a mail to them. There is always a Slack channel or a public communication channel that is available. So CNCF had a public communication channel, and I joined it. Inside that, there was a channel for Outreachy that my mentors had specifically created. So I joined that channel. So when you're starting off with the contribution period, don't directly email your mentors. That is not a good way to go. You always have the public channels, communicate on them. More you communicate on public channels, the better. Also, you can like communicate with your mentors personally, but it is always good to go on public channels and talk there. So once I joined the CNCF Slack channel, there was a whole outreachy welcome going on where my mentors were, welcoming everybody that wanted to contribute to the organization. And inside that, like they were discussing with, steps and how should we go about contributing and what should our initial contributions be like. So it is good to follow the guidelines that your mentors give and then start with contribution. So you need to like really go through huge code bases. I remember I was overwhelmed when I first saw the code base of my project. It's open telemetry. So I saw its code base and I was overwhelmed. There were like some 500 issues and like tons of pull requests and very high level code, and they were talking about extremely high level stuff, which I thought made very little sense to me. But I thought it's okay, let's see what I can do about it. So I started, like my mentors are obviously there for me, but I didn't want to bother them with every question I had. I mean, it is always good to ask your mentors, but it can also get very irritating if you text them like 20 times a day, right? Because there's so many other people that want to contribute and your mentors may get sick of you, and that's not a good way you want to like go about it. So I got talking to like the project that I started focusing on was the open telemetry project, and I got talking to like the people that were the project maintainers basically. So on GitHub, these open source projects usually have project maintainers. So I got talking to them, and I try to understand what the project is about. They directed me to a ton of resources. I went through them and I got to know that yeah, this is what the project is doing. Then I asked them, okay, I want to like apply to Outreach and I'm a total newbie to this project. So how do you suggest I start contributing? So they directed me to some coding issues, which were like good issues that I could work on. So there were some 500 issues open on that project at that moment, and it was very hard for me to understand that how should I select the issues which is relevant to me. So I asked these maintainers who like kind of understood what my background was, And the first thing to do is start off with a basic issue, simple issue. My first issue was like a documentation fix that I saw. So you see, it is all about the little details you notice. When I like cloned the project on my local computer, I use a Windows laptop. And when I was like setting up the project locally, there was some errors that I noticed. And when I followed like their documentation, I found that their documentation was not addressing the errors that I was facing. So I got talking to these project maintainers again and started telling them that, see, these are the errors that I'm facing, and this is how I fix them on my end. But the documentation isn't talking about it. And there can be so many people that have a Windows laptop and might want to work on the project and might face the same issue. So they said that, yeah, make a fix, add that, like, add a pull request, fix that in the documentation. And that was my first thing. So it's like about noticing the tiny details. Then I went on, contributing to a lot of issues. To be honest, I like made around 12 contributions, which is like a lot, but it was interesting. So it's not about the quantity, not at all. It is all about the quality of your contribution. My The project I wanted to apply to was a Java project. So I made sure that I contributed to issues wherein like I had to code in Java and I had to problem solve in Java. I did that. But apart from that, there were some like web development issues I saw, and I thought that, yeah, that's relevant to what I know and I can contribute, so why not do them? So yeah, you need to really explore and go on.
Yeah, and it really paid off for you, doing all the contributions and all the hard work. So after talking about what all outreach is about, so can let's go on and talk about the benefits or the perks of being an outreach intern.
Right, so there's like tons of benefits. I could tell you. The first thing I would say is the learning experience, the great experience you get out of it, the level of satisfaction, the amount of happiness you feel after having done it. Because for me, it was a very big thing. I remember the day I got the email that I was selected as an intern, I was extremely happy. So, and you get to learn so much through this experience. Like, my project dealt with performance testing, for example, and performance testing is something that I had not done before, but I knew Java and I knew every other thing that was needed for it. So I learned something new. I learned performance testing, which is something that you can't really learn that easily, but through my mentors and through the project I got the opportunity to. So it is like through the, like whatever project that you're working on, you get to learn a lot just through it. By interacting with your mentors, you get to know about the good coding skills that you should have. The you know you may improve on your coding style a lot. Like, for example, in my case, I learned how to write even cleaner code, and that really helps you in industry. Then again, performance testing is something that is widely used in industry, so I learned that through my internship. So learning experience is very important. Apart from that, we used to blog almost every 2 weeks. So yeah, I learned how to be a blogger as well. That's something that I hadn't done before. But yeah, it's actually quite fun when you do it. Apart from that, learning, and you get to meet a lot of people. Like, there is a whole networking boost. You get to interact with so many interns from across the world, and your network really improves. So that is like on your personal end. Apart from that, stipend, in case stipend is something that is like concerning everybody. To be honest, and Outreachy has one of the most like amazing stipends out there. So
Yeah.
during my time, it was like 6,000 USD, and now that I just saw the website like a while ago, and now it has increased to 7,000 USD.
Oh my God.
So yeah, there's like a huge stipend involved, and that might serve as great motivation for, I think, a lot of people. But stipend shouldn't be a motivation, the learning should be. But yeah, see, the reason they provide such a huge stipend is because you are underrepresented in this field, right? And you need this one to like grow and become what you are. So that is one thing. Apart from that, you get to interact with so many people, and like, you get to go to open source summits. So CNCF has this great open source KubeCon summit that they do like twice a year. And since this time we had COVID all around, so I wasn't able to go there. But it was scheduled like in the month of October. It was in Los Angeles, and if there was no COVID, I would have gone there.
Oh my
So
God. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And like, my organization was willing to fund everything, but the travel restrictions didn't really let me go. So hoping that travel restrictions ease out like in the future, interns have the opportunity to go to conferences, like they're given a travel stipend. Outreachy gives you a $500 travel stipend. I don't know how much is it this year. During my time it was a $500 travel stipend, but because of COVID the travel stipend was like rejected. So basically it is like my stipend in total was $6,000, out of which 5,500 was my regular stipend and 500 was reserved for the travel part. But since there was no COVID, the 500 was just given to me. But my organization was still willing to fund anything like if I wanted to travel. So yeah, you get to go to these summits, which are like seriously amazing. You get to summits from your organization and even outside of it. So that is one of the benefit. And apart from that, I think you get to live as an outreach intern for your life, and that is pretty amazing. So
And
yeah.
called on sessions to talk about outreachy.
Exactly, that it's really fun. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we just covered your experience being an outreachy intern. Would you like to add something on this question?
So yeah, I mean, my experience, I would say, was amazing. My mentors were the most amazing people I met. It's funny how you have to coordinate across time zones. Like me, my mentor, like I had two mentors, and all of us were like in three different time zones. So it was so funny to like coordinate the times. There was this one time I even missed a meeting because of a time zone mess up. But these things happen, and you learn through it. You interact with them because your mentors are already working in the industry, so they know a lot more than you do. So you learn a lot through them, and they have these great industry connections that they can introduce you to. So yeah, it's a good networking opportunity. And apart from that, you really get confident in your coding skills and the skills that you have. And there's like tons of learning involved at every single step in your project. And yeah, one more thing that I had to add on was that in your, like, if you get selected as an intern, you have like these checkpoints in between. So you have these feedbacks in between. That is like the initial feedback, the mid feedback, and the final feedback. So you need to work on your project really well so that you get a good feedback, because in case you don't get good feedback, your stipend that has been promised to you, you wouldn't be getting that. So you have to be like working in your project. And the project might seem overwhelming at first, but it all gets easier with time, with interactions, and going through tons of resources, it all gets easier. And yeah, you can also extend your internship in case you haven't been able to complete it in the given amount of time. But I think those instances are very few, because Outreachy is like pretty easygoing, and the project is designed in such a way that you will be able to complete it in the given amount of time. So yeah, that was the thing.
So, like, what was the most difficult part for you during the internship?
Oh, okay. Most difficult part would be when, so my project was performance testing, and I had to write performance tests for this whole big code suite. And sometimes, like, measuring the performance, looking at so many different factors that affect it, keeping an account of that. So I actually had to like go through a ton of operating system stuff also, because performance testing is directly like dependent on that. So I had to really learn about it from scratch, understand what kind of tests would be like relevant to what I do and what wouldn't be. So the difficult part would be like writing the tests, I would say, because it's very hard to come up with like good tests, like tests that actually address the kind of thing that you need to do. So yeah, it was that. And like I actually got talking to one of the people that heads the project, like not my mentors, like somebody in the organization. And like there was this one day I was like very overwhelmed with the amount of work I had. My tests were like literally going nowhere, and it was getting hard to write the code, and I wasn't able to really understand what would be relevant. So that like uh, person told me, like he's much older than I am, and he's working on the project, and he told me that there was an intern before me who had to work on the same project, and he totally screwed it up, because it is totally hard. So I don't need to worry about what I'm doing, and it's these little things of hope that help you. And then I thought that, okay, if that person did bad, then it's okay if I do bad.
Yeah,
And yeah, eventually you learn through it. So yeah, it
the
helps.
consolation is really matters.
Yeah, it does.
So, do you have any tips for the application, like for the future applicants?
Okay, so tips would be like firstly, on your initial application, be authentic and be original. Try to tell your story. During the contribution period, don't just focus on, for example, you're applying to a Java project. Don't just think that I know Java, that's all I need. No, it's good if you know more. And if you know more, reflect that. And during your contribution period, log in your issues, your pull requests, whatever contribution you make in a timely period, so that when you start the contribution, when you finished working on that issue, you need to log in all of that when you're filling the final application. So make sure that you log in all of those details properly, and work on issues that are relevant to you, and don't be afraid to ask questions to like your mentors or anybody in the organization, because everyone in open source is like really really helping, and you get to learn so much from every interaction. So in case you have a question, go ahead and ask. In case you're overwhelmed by the code base, go ahead and ask the people heading the project that what should I do, how should I go about it. So it's all about like asking questions and learning. So yeah, that's about it.
So, any last minute advice for our viewers?
I mean, advice I would just say that don't be overwhelmed by it. Keep a track of the dates, because Outreachy, the applications tend to run for a while. So keep a good track of the dates, like when the deadline for the initial application ends, when the contribution period begins. So keep a track of all those dates. And lastly, before you apply for Outreachy, like applications will open in like more than a month. So anybody that is like aspiring to apply to Outreachy, I would suggest that you try your hands on open source first. Get familiar with the whole open source like framework, like how to send pull requests, how to open issues, how to go about it. So yeah, that's how you need to like be really familiar with open source. Like it can be any kind of project you apply to, documentation, coding, anything, but knowing open source is a must. So yeah, that's about it.
Okay, so like I'm done with my questions. So if anybody has any questions in the audience, please feel free to type it in the chat, and Harshita would take it up. Let's wait for a minute or two, and then if there are no questions from the audience, we can wrap it up. I believe there are no more questions. So this was it from my side, Harshita. Thank you so much for coming to Scholarship Track and and explaining your whole experience about Outreachy Internship. It was lovely having you. Thank you.
Thank you. It was amazing to be a part of this.